And that is it. Let's talk about it a little bit more with Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. I'm going to ask you right here, Jonna, first of all, good morning.
Good morning.
Reaction.
He did himself no favor with that allocution. I don't have in fact, I probably have less sympathy for him now. You can't stand in front of a jury and say, you know, I'm not asking for mercy while you're asking for mercy, number one.
Right. It's strange because he says, look, if you ask these kindergarten children what do they want to be when they grow up, I'm pretty sure they don't want to be abused. He said he was abused, he became the abuser, trying to ask for sympathy, but then says, you can sentence me to death.
Yeah, like, I don't blame you if you sentence me to death, but please spare my life. And frankly, he is not offering enough of an excuse. There is no excuse. There is no justification for killing 5 people. But there are a lot of men and women in this world who had it rough as children, who still have it rough as adults. And guess what, folks? We don't kill other people. So for me, it's not enough. I don't think there's going to be one tear shed in that jury box.
Well, this jury also heard a little bit more about his upbringing, and we're going to play you right now the testimony of Patty Van Eyes, a PhD and clinical director. She is a very interesting witness for the defense, talking about what Mr. Kirkland's life was like when he was a young boy. Take a look. Okay, so we're learning a little bit more about the upbringing of Anthony Kirkland, this convicted serial killer. But will it work to save his life? Let's bring back on Jonna. Jonna, is this effective in this case, or ever? Is this ever work in terms of capital punishment cases?
You know what? Let's start there. Is it ever effective? Yes, it can be effective if you have had one of the world's worst childhood, if you were physically and mentally abused, if your parents basically were monsters, or you didn't have any parents and you were raised by wolves, figuratively speaking. Yes, it can work, and it can explain a lot of bad behavior. In this case, however, he might not have had the best childhood, but it should not have compelled him to kill not 1, not 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Not sympathetic.
And you combine it with the statement that he made to the jury, where he says he's not asking for forgiveness, but also understand that I didn't ask for this, that I grew up in a household where the people who were supposed to care for me didn't. And I saw the beatings, I saw sexual activity at a very young age, and there's even indication that he was sexually abused as well as physically abused. But you said it really well before. There's so many people that go through similar situations or even worse, and they don't grow up and end that way.
No, they don't. And let's remember something. This man did a significant stint in prison after killing his first victim, got out, and killed 4 more times. So explain that. You have 16 years to figure out how to not be screwed up, and you couldn't figure it out. We have mental health professionals. We have drugs that help people with mental illness. He could have taken advantage of any of that at any point in his life before killing 5 people. He didn't.
Are you saying that the prison system for him didn't rehabilitate him as well as they would have liked?
Not even a little bit. What it did for the rest of us was keep him from killing more people during the 16 years or however long he was in there for.
I know, it's pretty unbelievable. 4 women after he was released over years. And it wasn't until that he confessed to his crimes in police interviews that we were able to attach him to all of these crimes. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we are going to take a break from Kirkland, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Paul Manafort case. There's a lot to discuss, and John and I are going to tackle that. And then later on, we're hopefully going to be live in the Kirkland case. Again, as a reminder, we are expecting the closing arguments in that case. You do not want to miss that. We're talking all about it. So when we come back, we'll talk about Manafort. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. So, I want to talk about probably the most high-profile case in America right now. The Paul Manafort trial, currently underway in Virginia, faces numerous charges related to bank fraud, tax evasion. This is President Trump's former campaign chair. And now, as the prosecution has been continuing their case, they have been bringing forth accountants that worked intimately with this man's finances. And this has been a really interesting area that I want to talk about right now. So I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor. We've seen the testimony from multiple accountants. One of them is an immunized witness who's basically saying he never told us, our accountants, Paul Manafort never told us that he operated these, he owned and controlled these foreign business entities that ultimately paid him money. We thought that they might have been clients of his. And on emails, he said he didn't own or operate any foreign entities, and he denied in written communications. So having that evidence, can he really say, oh, I didn't know what was going on, it was all Rick Gates' fault, my business partner?
I think this is the case that is all about passing the buck. And I have a little bit of a bad attitude about it, and here's why. And I will answer your question, but here's why. Don't forget, the reason why Paul Manafort is in trial to begin with is because, oh, we were looking for, oh, Russian collusion. Oh, let's get something on Donald Trump. Oh. And then all of a sudden, when they couldn't get anything, they found some other junk in his closet, and that's what he's on trial for. It's like if you got pulled over leaving the show today, Jesse, and for some reason the cop decided to go in your trunk and they found a body.
I'll play devil's advocate, though, there.
Please do.
What he's accused of is illegal. So it doesn't really matter if he worked for Trump or he was just a regular wealthy individual. He got caught because he was caught in the crossfire of a very public situation. So what he's doing is illegal.
I'm not saying what he's doing isn't illegal, although we'll see what happens with this case. Maybe he'll be found not guilty. But in order for him to answer your question, in order for him to deny, he's going to have to take the stand and actually talk. And I don't know at this point if that's advisable. This is a rare moment for me where I actually think, you know how you're not supposed to take a cue from a judge?
Right.
I actually believe in this case the judge has given us some clues that he's kind of on Paul Manafort's side here. Not that, I mean, they're not really supposed to do that. And maybe it's just me interpreting that. But I think the judges, if there are any rulings that are favorable to Manafort, then he's making them throughout the course of this case.
Well, he said he initially questioned, like you did, why is this case being brought by the special counsel's office? What does that have to do with Russia? But then after looking at Rod Rosenstein's memo, basically saying that this gave the Mueller authority to investigate any links between any people that were associated with Trump and Russia, sure. But here's the thing. If you take this case, the idea of passing the buck, as you say, or blaming Rick Gates and saying, you know what, I just followed the advice of my business partner. He told me to do X, Y, and Z. So when my accountants asked, I just did what he told me. Is there any way the defense can craft an argument that might work?
Yes, if they can give that message to the jury, perhaps without, well, you know, maybe it's not going to be bad for Paul Manafort to testify, but if they can make that argument to the jury, it's kind of like playing that shell game. You know, when you have the ball under one of the cups and everybody's doing this, and the jury has to decide at the end of the day where that ball is, figuratively speaking. If it doesn't land in Paul Manafort's lap, then maybe they do come back with an acquittal. Well, it is an interesting case to follow nonetheless, and we are going to cover it here. As I said, here on Law and Crime, we have one of our own very reporters in the courtroom, Colin, and he's going to talk to us later. So, Jonna, thank you for your insight there. But I want to talk about another case that I think we might have opening statements in right now. It's a case out of Georgia, a new case that we're covering here. It's about a man named Stephen Foster. He was a Democratic candidate for Congress who's accused of DUI. Now, this is the interesting wrinkle. He's saying that he was actually drinking that night because he has this rare form of malaria, and the tonic would actually help suppress the symptoms from it. This guy is a very interesting guy to watch, and from what we've read, he's also claiming he was attacked in prison and that this was an improper focus. So let's go live right now into the opening statements. I believe that might have been the prosecution. So let's just wait for the defense. I think we're just waiting. That is a live feed. And he's coming up now. Okay, so let's go live into the Georgia v. Stephen Foster case. You know, for a DUI case, it's actually pretty interesting. I want to bring back on Jonna Spilbor. Why is this even going to trial? Are you surprised? I have a feeling, based on what we know about the defendant's personality, which seems to be pretty colorful, that he probably refused any attempt to get this reduced to something lower than a standard DWI. Because I'm going to tell you right now, even if you take his reading as true, the .10, that's not a very high reading. Years ago, that was the legal limit, and then it was reduced to .08. So even if that number's accurate, he wasn't hammered, for lack of a better word. So the prosecutors would have offered him to reduce this to maybe a DWA or some other offense, maybe not even involving alcohol, and he most likely refused because he's innocent, people. In his mind, he's innocent.
Well, I think one of the arresting officers is coming on the stand right now, so I hope we can jump back in if we can. Yes, so let's jump back in. We can learn a little bit more about what happened that night. I gotta say, this is a pretty fun case. Let's bring back in Jonna Spilbor to talk a little bit more about it. So, under cross-examination of this officer who arrested this defense attorney's client, Stephen Foster, he's saying, look, you never smelled alcohol on him, never saw him driving erratically, never mentioned any of this in your report. That seems to be a big point for the defense. Seems
to be a pretty good point for the defense, but let me just give you a quick little primer, although I call it primer. Whenever a cop pulls somebody over for DWI, what we have in most states is what we call a supporting deposition. On that supporting deposition, you have a bunch of boxes. And next to the boxes are things like odor of alcohol, unsteady gait, different erratic things that you could drive erratically. And all the police officer has to do when they're making an arrest is check the appropriate boxes. What this defense attorney is saying to this apparently rookie officer, you didn't check that box, basically, is what he's saying. You didn't smell the alcohol. You didn't see him doing anything, violating any vehicle and traffic laws, except that he didn't put his lights on. The defense attorney is doing a good job at establishing that there might not have been a good reason to have probable cause to suspect he was driving under the influence. I mean, it's from a practical point of view. If someone's been drinking, you can't smell the alcohol, and they're not driving all across the road. He shouldn't have said, I had a couple drinks. That gave the officer the in. Well, he should have kept his mouth shut. What's he going to do, lie? No, officer, I declined to answer. See, now that's a good lawyer answer. We'll have more good lawyer answers after this short break. Stay tuned. We have a lot covering here on Law and Crime. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I want to bring back on Jonna Spilbor to talk a little bit more about the prosecution's closing argument in the Anthony Kirkland case. How's he doing? He's doing a great job. It's excellent. He's going through everything point by point. He is really, you cannot help but feel such sympathy and even a sickness when he describes what exactly happened to these young victims. And then, he says, now let's talk about the experts. And his first expert, Dr. Wu, he basically says is the worst human being on the face of the earth. Don't give him any credibility. Don't listen to anything he said. He's now going through the second expert. He is hitting all the points. Yeah, there was an objection there, as he said, I don't hold anybody in less repute than him. There's an objection. He goes, I'll withdraw that. You make a determination. But we've seen constantly throughout this case that his methodology has been questioned. And you heard it yourself. Dr. Wu has found maybe once in 1,000 cases that someone had a normal brain. Interesting for the jury. They're going to have to decide who to believe and what to believe. We'll take a quick break on our end, and when we come back, we're going live into the Anthony Kirkland case. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. Great timing. The prosecution just concluded their closing argument in this case. We're waiting for the defense to start. I want to just ask Jonna Spilbor, if I can, a quick question. Did you just not get the feeling that he almost said something that was inappropriate? Remember, the reason we have this new trial, this new sentencing hearing, was because of an inappropriate comment that the prosecutor made in the last case, where he said, listen, jury, if you don't find the death penalty for Esme and Kenny, they're basically, Esme Kenny and Cassandra Crawford, they're basically freebies because he's already serving life in prison for 2 other murders. This prosecutor just said something so similar, but he caught himself. Did you get that, John? Yeah, he did. But the point he had to make was, listen, this case is so appropriate for the death penalty. That's the only conclusion you can draw at the end of the day when you hear all the evidence. And that's the point he was trying to make. Probably the same point that the first prosecutor was trying to make. But I think he did it. I still think he did a great job. Yeah, he was about to say, he goes, listen, you're going to go back, and if you say, okay, sorry, Esme, sorry, Cassandra, and then he said the mitigation doesn't outweighs the aggravating. But again, it's a tricky, because you're fueled by so much emotion when you're giving these statements, right, Jonna? How can you not be? He described how these young girls died. And now we're going to have to see what the defense does. They're beginning with their closing argument right now. Let's go live. Okay, so the defense in their closing argument is doing anything to save their life for their client. I want to bring back on Jonna Spilbor to talk about this. If this is true, had a really awful upbringing, then what separates him from every other evil individual who had a tough upbringing? That's the question, because I am not sympathizing with this argument. Plenty of people have it rough. They don't kill people. Don't refer to this defendant, this killer, as this child didn't have a chance. This was a grown man who had 16 years in the big house to figure it out. He didn't. This argument's falling short. But all they need is one juror
to take sympathy from Mr. Kirkland, and then they will not be able to sentence him to death.
You are correct.
It'll be life in prison. And, Jonna, we're going to have to see what happens. We have to take a quick break on our end. But when we come back, we'll jump live. We'll listen to more of the defense's closing argument, and then it will ultimately be in the hands of the jury. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, I think we all need a stretch after listening to all of this, both from the prosecution and the defense. I want to go back to Jonna Spilbor. How's the defense doing? The style is radically different than the prosecution.
Yeah, and it has to be, right? The prosecution had a lot to work with in terms of the aggravating factors and appealing to the emotions of the jurors. The defense had to be more staid. The defense had to be more clinical. Look, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the problem with my client is in his brain, and that's not his fault. You can't blame him. Therefore, you cannot sentence him to death, was the point.
Let's see. The defense is continuing on with their closing argument. Let's go live. Okay, talking a little bit more about the battle of experts, let's go back to Jonna Spilbor. Now I love that they're going on the offensive, attacking the prosecution's witness, Dr. Waxman, said he's been following Dr. Wu across the country and telling him why he's a bad doctor.
Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say this portion of the program is the battle of the experts. And now this defense attorney is going to try to convince the jury that they should give more weight to the defense experts than the prosecution experts. And I got to tell you, when it comes to this kind of scientific evidence, when the jury's trying to hang their hat on something, it's very important. Who they believe more is going to be a critical issue here.
And I guess it matters even if you assume that he has a traumatic brain injury and his brain just maybe functionally was not working the same way. Is that enough to convince a jury that this guy should be sentenced to life in prison as opposed to death? And I know, Jonna, we only have 10 seconds till our next break, and we'll talk about it after. But that's ultimately the decision that this jury will have to make. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, so this is a really interesting case. We're in the defense's closing argument in the Anthony Kirkland trial. Before we go live there, I want to just have to sign off Jonna Spilbor. Unfortunately, our time together is coming to a close. My final question to you is, even if they accept, the jury, that Mr. Kirkland suffers from a traumatic brain injury or even a mental disease or a defect, will that influence their decision about what his sentence should be?
It very well could. That's the job of the defense attorney here. But no matter how you slice it, this is a heart-wrenching and heartbreaking case. 5 dead women, 2 of them children. There are no winners here. We'll have to wait and see.
Jonna, thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Jesse. Always a pleasure.
Let's go back live, and this is the defense's closing argument.